As a reminder before we start with today's video, today is also Good Samaritan Saturday, so this evening live on stream we are going to be doing some charity keys for everyone who wants to join. Keys in the 17 to 20 range, I would say. You don't even have to have that much of a human character. You will be definitely carried by yours truly and anyone else who wants to join. So in around 3 to 4 hours from the release of this video, 9 to 10 p.m. EU time, that's what we will be doing on stream. Now, what we are doing instead on this video today is talking about balance tuning, because last week Blizzard had the first round of changes to specs and classes and then mentioned that on the reset of December the 5th we were going to have some more balance tuning. Therefore, let's take a look at what balance tuning was Blizzard talking about. First in line, no, ignore blood. This is just a change to the Aberrus tier set. We go straight into Unholy. So, the Unholy change is the mostly AoE focused change because the buffs go to Epidemic, Virulent Plague, and then Festering Strike and Festering Wound, as well as the sweeping close damage of their ghoul. Now, overall, this damage is rather small. Right, even if we go into, for example, this is the ranking of Mythic Plus, so you get to have a good idea of the damage of an Unholy Death Knight in an AoE situation. Here is your Death Knight. I'm assuming the Havoc Demon Hunter was either sleeping or severely ill to be outdamaged by a Unholy Death Knight. But as you can see, even from the little squiggly lines Chinese people call an alphabet, you can see that the Virulent Plague is doing quite a significant amount of AoE damage together with Epidemic. So pretty much number 1 and number 2 of their AoE damage is being buffed by 15 and by 12%. The other ability, the Festering Strike and the damage of their ghoul are not nearly as big. The sweeping close of the ghoul as well as Festering Strike is much more minor of a damage increase. Overall though, it still only evens out to be some 3 to 3.5% damage increase. So we're not talking about anything major. And even then, this is the damage for AoE, not even for single target, which is even less, because Epidemic is not really a big part of your single target damage. Talking about the situation of Unholy, of course, Unholy in the raid, as it is right now, is not doing particularly well. If we look at the average DPS, the raiding results average-ish damage in the raid, and then in Mythic Plus is where Unholy does quite a bit worse than other specs, and also where the buff is going to be bigger for Unholy. So even if it's just a 3 to 4% damage increase, for example, just looking at this number, they would go up to some 142,000, 143,000, right? It will start to be, well, still less than most of them, but at least it's an increase, which is not something we can say about Havoc Demon Hunter, because instead Havoc is getting nerfed. Unfortunately, this is something many players were expecting and predicting, that Havoc was going to be one of the specs nerfed. However, I am here to crash the party, to tell you all that the nerf is irrelevant, because Fel Rush, Immolation Aura and Fel Barrage are the 3 abilities being nerfed. This is basically nothing. This is at best a 3% damage nerf, because if we go back to our Unholy friend, which was in a group with a Havoc Demon Hunter, you can just straight up go to the Havoc Demon Hunter and figure out that the 12% damage nerf to Immolation Aura, which also applies to Ragefire, since Ragefire is damage from Immolation Aura, is barely a 2.5% or so damage nerf, and then you add the 12% damage nerf to Fel Rush, so it's 3.3, 3.4% damage nerf, and then damage to Fel Barrage, which is not here. That is perhaps the most confusing of the picks that Blizzard went for to nerf Havoc, because when you look at Havoc and you search for their average, most popular talents, as you can see here, these 2 talent setups alone are actually 75% of all talent choices, and the more popular one is the one that doesn't have Fel Barrage, the one that doesn't go for Fel Barrage, which is this one right here. Yet Blizzard still thought this was going to be too big of a problem and actually nerfed Fel Barrage. But even if you do play the non-Fel Barrage build, this is at best a 3.5% damage. What's even worse is that this is specifically just for AoE, not even as much for single target, because your damage in single target from these two abilities, as well as the damage of the Ragefire in single target, is much smaller. If we take the same key, the same Black Rook hold, and instead of looking at all of the damage, we just stick to a pure single target boss, like for example Smash Spite the Hateful, you will find that Ragefire is basically nowhere to be seen, and also you will find that the damage of Fell Rush is also significantly smaller. Not only is it only a 3.5 something % nerf, but it's also primarily for AoE. And as you can see here, Havoc Demon Hunter is averaging roughly 15 to even 20% more damage than other specs. So being nerfed by 3.5% is nothing. You got away with murder as a Havoc Demon Hunter with this set of changes. Who got away with even more murder is the fact that the changes to Demon Hunter stop at Havoc, because you would be expecting after the nerfs to Havoc to see nerfs to Vengeance, and instead we jump straight to Resto Druid. If Havoc gets away with murder, then Vengeance gets away with being a serial killer for today. What we have for Restoration Druid is nothing really major, it's just a slight change, just slight tune down to the massive damage boost they received a few days ago. Now it's slightly smaller. Ferocious Bite, the finisher, is nerfed by 20%, Rip by 15%, and then Rake and Shred by 10%. It still keeps up very high damage in cat form as a Resto Druid, now it's just slightly smaller, but still very high damage if you do invest in being a kitty for a while as a healer. After this you have Devastation Evoker. This is again slightly sad due to the state of augmentation. It's not that Devastation is that terrible, you can even tell from their damage here compared to the damage of the specs that are actually at the bottom. It's not nearly as terrible, it's just that it gets overshadowed too often by Augmentation Evoker. The result is that they get a blanket 5% damage increase, on top of some extra defensiveness. You get 2% more leech and 2% more stamina as a Devastation Evoker. So it's just good overall. It's not that Devastation, even if you account for Augmentation being powerful. Devastation was super strong by any means, neither in the raid results. So a 5% buff is definitely at the very least warranted. Talking about meta specs, we mentioned the nerf to Havoc. The other meta spec, for example, just naming a casual one, is Beast Mastery, the other spec at the top right now. Beast Mastery is also a spec that receives nerfs. So they get a nerf which is less big than you would be expecting. Dire Beast kill command damage is reduced by 30%, and then Beast Cleave gained by Dire Beast is reduced by 30%. Now, first of all, most of this is going to be hurting your AoE. Very similarly to the nerf of Havoc Demon Hunter, it's not nearly as impactful in the raid, in single target, right? Now, the actual problem of this nerf is that even if you were to start calculating how much of a damage nerf this is, you would have some problems, because this is the most popular build of a marksmanship hunter when it comes to the raid, and then you have the one for Mythic Plus, which as you can see barely doesn't change besides picking up some misdirection for Mythic Plus, and Dire Beast in both of the talent setups is not even being taken to begin with. Yes, of course, Beast Mastery Hunters do still get Dire Beast summoned because of their tier set, obviously, but the impact of the Dire Beast skill command being reduced, as well as the Beast Cleave from Dire Beast, is not nearly as impactful, thanks to you not playing with Dire Beast to begin with and only benefiting from Dire Beast from your tier set. So it is a nerf, but again, it's not nearly as impactful, especially when you start looking at the gap that Beast Mastery has compared to other specs. Yes, it's not nearly as big of a gap as Havoc. In fact, in this very key of Ataldazar, the Beast Mastery Hunter himself is getting hugely gapped by Havoc Demon Hunter, right? Still though, they were still performing very well in the raid and in Mythic Plus, and this nerf is just overall simply too small. to contain the power of Beast Mastery Hunter. We have, though, our first significant nerf when it comes to healers, because this one is for Mistweaver Monk. Number one, their mana T is now reducing the mana cost of your spells by half as much compared to before, and then the rest of the nerfs are just flat out lower healing increases. One is to Upwelling with lower stacks, one is to Essence Font, one more importantly is to Invigorating Mist, which is a key part of your ramp. All of these are quite hurtful nerfs to Mistweaver, which is at the moment performing, as you can see, in terms of sheer HPS, easily the best out of all healers. Perhaps what might be actually the worst out of all of these is not even the healing reductions, but the mana reduction. One of the problems you might have heard your healer friends complain about, in especially Mythic raiding, has been the heavy problems of mana when it comes to healers. That is something that Mistweaver monks don't really have, partially or very heavily thanks to mana T. If you look at the resources spent, the mana spent by a monk, you can see that the mana T alone is 290,000 mana back in a Mythic Smolderon fight. If you take a similar healer that is also quite mana hungry like Discipline, you will see their main source of mana regen, Mana Leech, is 110,000 compared to the 290,000 of a monk. Even if you go over to something like a Paladin, their Daybreak is 85,000 plus Blessing of Winder 50,000. That's 134,000, and then you have the poor ass Holy Priest who has the least amount of regen out of all of them. So Mistweaver was swimming in mana compared to other healers. What's even worse is that this mana regen doesn't even account for the mana discount. This was purely from the mana restoration of mana T. It wasn't even including the reduction of the mana cost of your spells by 50% per one stack of mana T consumed. This isn't even what gets nerfed. What gets nerfed is the effect on top of this, the mana discount going down to 25% instead of 50%. But that was still and still is a significant power of Mistweaver compared to other healers when it comes to the raid. Their mana, essentially. Still talking about Monk, we have a much simpler and clearer change for Windwalker, which is flat out ability damage increased by 6%. Well, going back to damage, the situation of Windwalker wasn't particularly exciting, so getting buffed by 6% will obviously help. If you look at the average DPS, this is a buff of 6%, so 6% of the median, the average of Windwalker of 169,000. That's about a 10,000 DPS increase. So their new median after the buff should go up to 178,000, which is roughly here, yeah, in around this area. This is where the buff should be bringing Windwalker Monk when it comes to the raid. When it comes to Mythic Plus, they were actually doing significantly better because of their AoE being better than their single target. So this one being buffed by 6% should actually bring them closer to the 151, 152 range, which is quite high if you compare the averages of the other specs. Yes, it's of course still behind Demo, Outlaw, Assassination, and then of course the two specs at the top, but it's definitely a much more respectable type of damage when it comes to Mythic Plus. In the raid, this is still not really going to make them that much stronger. For Holy Paladin, we only have mana regen changes, so Holy Paladin wasn't really doing too well in terms of mana. Now they get Crusader Strike and Hammer of Wrath to cost much less mana than they currently are, and also something that they do kind of want, more damage. This might shock players who only stopped thinking about healer's damage back when Holy Paladin was OP and they were doing tons of damage. Nowadays, that's not really the case anymore. As a matter of fact, nowadays in Mythic Plus, Holy Paladin has the least amount of damage out of all of the healers. And even if we go actually into the raid, in terms of damage of healers inside the raid, Holy Paladin is also garbage. Is also averaging quite a low average DPS, which is at just 13 to 14 1000. So quite low down in terms of damage, so this will definitely help keep up a bit more the damage of Holy Paladin. What is quite simple and we can skip and go by quite quickly is the 3% healing and damage nerf to Discipline Priest. Much like we mentioned, Holy Paladin doing little damage in Mythic class, Discipline was at the top of the damage done together with Mistweaver. Same goes for the raid damage, where the damage of Mistweaver is of course tremendously lower because they're not fist weaving in the raid. They don't get to do that much damage, but instead Discipline doesn't actually change the amount of damage they are doing, so it stays still quite high in the raid. So the damage and the slight as well, the slight heal nerf is, I would say, rather warranted, even though right now it doesn't show, because if you looked at the healing done of a Discipline Priest, you know, it looks average, it looks completely even with the other specs, right? But overall, especially also given the popularity of Discipline, as you can see, it is crushing any other spec that isn't Holy Paladin, so I would say this set of nerfs is also warranted for one of the priest specs. What is also warranted is what comes after for the other healing spec of priest, which is Holy. All healing increased by 4%, plus more damage, more AoE damage in Mythic Plus thanks to the buff of Burning Vehemence, and then slightly more healing, but more importantly more resets of your holy wards thanks to the buff of your 2-piece. Now your holy wards will leave behind a longer lasting renew, 4 seconds longer for the single target renews, and then 1 second longer for the AoE renews placed by Sanctify. This, much like the slight nerf to Discipline was needed, also the buff to Holy Priest was needed. As we mentioned, Holy Paladin being the lowest damage dealer in Mythic Plus, who was the second lowest? Holy Priest. So that is also quite a needed buff in terms of damage for Holy Priest. We were talking about Discipline Priest not having that much of a strong heal compared to, for example, Mistweaver. Guess who is the lowest healer in the raid? It's Holy by a landslide. Overall, the buff to the Holy spec for Priest is also definitely warranted, considering the meta state they are in right now. Talking about warranted things, there is also a warranted nerf to Rogue. This time, though, it is only Assassination. Outlaw gets away with not being nerfed. You can say definitely in the raid, the nerf was more needed for Assassination. Even if you go and buy what are the Rogue players actually playing, you can see Assassination is definitely above, almost like, what, 4 times as many Assassination players than there are Outlaw players. And their performance is, well, you know, it shows how well performing they are right now. It is perhaps not quite the same in Mythic Plus, where Outlaw is still out-damaging Assassination, for example. However, Kingsbane damage is reduced by 15%, as well as the ambush chance reset is now 15% instead of 20%, and 30% against low HP targets instead of 40%. These are the 2 nerfs given to Assassination. This is about barely, not even a 5% damage nerf when it comes to single target, and less than half of that, 2-point-something% when it comes to AoE. So, for Assassination, for example, you could be expecting the average damage to go down from 207,000 to go down to 195-ish thousand, which would bring them basically here. You know, basically this line would be moving around here, which is just basically still the strongest, but now in line with a few others. That makes a bit more sense. It also makes more sense that the other 2 lines, a bit too far ahead, are also the ones getting nerfed. Havoc and Beast Mastery are also the other 2 specs being nerfed together with Assassination. And also, it makes sense that the damage nerf to Mythic Plus to AoE of Assassination is not nearly as big to the damage nerf they are receiving in single target, in their burst window around Kingsbane, which is more deadly and powerful for single target situations. That's also more of a sensible nerf. The last of the changes is also the smallest one, not very impactful. Resto Shaman gets a mana discount on their Healing Surge. This is almost irrelevant, only valuable a bit in Mythic Plus, where you might be casting this more. What is more relevant for Mythic Plus is the damage buff. Chain Lightning gets 20% more damage, and Acid Rain gets 10% more damage. This is more relevant because we have already mentioned the couple of lowest damage dealing healers in Mythic Plus, and they were Holy Paladin and Holy Priest. Guess who was right next to them? Yes, it's Resto Shaman. So basically the damage of all these three specs has been increased. Hammer of Wrath, Crusader Strike, Burning Vehemence for Holy Fire damage, and now Acid Rain and Chain Lightning for the AoE damage of Resto Shaman. So these numbers should be going up by quite a bit. They shouldn't probably match these couple of specs, but they should at the very least start reaching Druid / Evoker range of damage when it comes to healers in Mythic Plus. So these for now are the changes when it comes to this round of balance tuning. Yes, some specs might be missing from this. For example, where are the changes / nerfs to Outlaw when it comes to AoE damage, to Vengeance when it comes to their immortality problem in Mythic Plus, for example, that's also missing. Perhaps some other specs you might be thinking being forgotten, maybe a couple more changes to Shadow Priest or to specs like the Mage specs that have not really been given any attention. This was though the set of tuning thought by Blizzard for the incoming reset. So not now, these are not hot fixes, this will come with the reset on December the 5th in like 3 days. That's when these are planned to go live. So I'm going to leave you to your own conclusions about these sets of changes, because for now it is time to leave each other. Don't forget, of course, that tonight, this evening on EU, we're gonna be live on stream as well. If you want to pop by and do some Mythic Plus keys at a reasonable 17 to 20-ish level, that's where we will be for tonight. So with these things out of the way, thanks of course as usual to all of the Patreon supporters for the contribution and help to the growth of the channel, which can as usual also be given completely for free. You can like and comment down below, as well as subscribe to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys, I guess, in a few hours on stream. And in the meantime, well, this was late. I was supposed to have this video done approximately 10 hours ago, and things got delayed a little bit. Let's call it that way.